Let me ask you a question. Right now, you're listening to the radio, but what else are you doing? Maybe you're driving, maybe you're thinking about what to make for dinner, maybe you're checking Facebook. In our society, we're used to multitasking all the time. But what does this mean? Does this mean we struggle to actually listen to the people around us? Oscar Trimboli is a leadership coach, author, and expert in deep listening. Hello, Oscar.
G'day, Ashwin. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. What exactly is deep listening?
It's the ability to listen beyond the words. When we grew up at school, we all got taught maths, we got taught English, but none of us got taught how to listen. And most of us listen with our ears, but what we need to do is also learn to listen with our eyes, listen with our heart, and listen to what the other person isn't saying.
Okay, so it's a much more intuitive form of listening.
Yeah, and the ancient cultures, with NAIDOC Week coming up next week, Aborigines have a great word for this called Dadiri. It means your connection to yourself, the lands and the people around you. So it talks about all dimensions of listening. In Chinese culture, they talk about ting. Ting means to listen, and it means not only your ears and your eyes, but it also means listen with focus, listen with presence, and listen with your heart. So if we go back to those ancient cultures, they can teach us so much more about listening than today, because we think that in the workplace, we can listen to somebody while we're on our phone or a laptop or an iPad, or when we're at home while the TV's going on. But we all know with no training whatsoever when people aren't listening to us, and we get quite frustrated by that. In the workplace, it results in people having to repeat themselves or send emails to explain what they just said in a meeting because they didn't feel heard. Yeah. People leave organisations because their managers don't listen to them. That's the number one reason why people don't stay married.
It does seem to be a cultural issue. And I guess in our language, we don't really have a word for total attentive listening like they do in the Indigenous cultures. But you mentioned officers just earlier. And you're very against multitasking, aren't you?
Well, multitasking is a myth. The neuroscience of today, meaning we have technology that allows us to know what our brain's doing when we're trying to multitask, means that humans are really poor at it. Earl Miller out of MIT in 2016 did a piece of research that said humans are awesome at task switching, but they're not good at multitasking. So it means we can hold our attention in a really focused way on a task for a very short period of time and then switch to another and switch to another. But there is a cost involved in that because we lose attention on the first or the second task. So different domain, driving a car. If you're concentrating on driving a car and somebody calls you while you're driving along in the car, you're completely distracted and your driving effectiveness reduces by nearly a third while you're talking to somebody on the phone. So you're more likely to have an accident when you're driving along with somebody on the phone, even if you're hands-free, than if you're not. So multitasking is a complete myth.
They say women, coming back to multitasking, can multitask better than men. Is this true?
I think what's true is women can task switch quicker than men, and equally women and men listen differently as well. Men listen to solve problems and women listen to explore and are curious, so they're not always trying to fix you when they're listening to you, whereas men are really good at trying to get focused on, okay, so how can I solve whatever's in front of me? And I've tried that many times with my wife and it's not been very successful at all.
No, but I guess both kinds of listening are important, but we should get better at the style of listening that we're not good at the moment.
Yeah, and listening's contextual as well as relational. It means we listen differently to our boss than we would to our wife or our children. We listen to our peers or our friends differently than we might listen to our grandparents. And the context matters as well. So this context, we're listening on the radio, but we're probably doing something else. So you just have to be conscious of kind of the four villains of listening. The lost listener, the dramatic listener, the interrupting listener, and the shrewd listener. The research tells us that we all fit into one of these four categories, and we really, really get frustrated with one of those four listening types. The most obvious listening type is the interrupting listener. The minute you draw a breath, they think that's their commercial break to give you their opinion. And although they are well-intentioned, because they're so overt, we get a little bit frustrated by them. The shrewd listener, disproportionately represented by salespeople or accountants or lawyers or even teachers, they're listening with a mindset of, yeah, I know what you're saying and I can solve your problem. I wish you'd hurry up and get to the really complex problem because I'm so bored with this conversation. But they'll be nodding at you and pretending they're listening shrewdly. The dramatic listeners are the people who are always going to top your story. No matter what your problem is, they've got one that's even bigger than that. And the lost listener doesn't really know why they want to be there or even if they should be, particularly shows up in meetings.
It's a lot of awful traits in one template. What do we do about this?
Well, there's a couple of things that make listening really simple to access. The first one is understanding the 125/400 rule, which means you speak at 125 words a minute, but you can listen to up to 400 words a minute. So we are bored by the time somebody finishes saying something because our mind can process 3 times as much in the conversation. So knowing that we're going to be distracted, you just want to know the next tip, which is the deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen. And again, the ancients, whether it's the Aboriginal cultures, the Chinese cultures, the Arabic cultures, the Indian cultures, the African cultures, all have a very significant part to play in terms of breathing. So the deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen. In 1993, there was some research out of Canada that showed the deeper you breathe, the deeper you listened, and the more productive conversations, breathing ultimately became synchronized between the parties. And the last one, and this is the most obvious, switch off all your devices.
You mean all day or just 5 minutes before you go to bed?
If you're gonna go and talk to someone in a really important conversation, announce you're switching off your device.
Yeah.
Switch your device off and put it away. The act of announcing you're going to switch off your device, in 2/3 of cases, will, not by saying it, but by doing it, will encourage the other person to do exactly the same. You know, there's some research that came out last year that said 2/3 of people with mobile phones, when they're on non-ring mode, the vibrate mode, feel fake vibrations in their phone, even though the phone hasn't rung.
Yes.
Have you felt that?
I have. That's how pathologized we've become.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the kinds of psychology and technology that are in phones now, they've taken stuff from the poker machine industry and the learnings from the poker machine industry to keep people engaged in the device. So, number one, pick up the device, say you're going to put it away. Number 2, switch it off. And number 3, put it out of sight. And you will dramatically increase the quality of your conversation with the other person because nearly 1/3 of what you do when you listen is listening with your eyes.
Oscar Trimbola is a leadership coach, author and expert in deep listening. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Asher.
And Oscar mentioned Indigenous culture and its approach to listening. A little earlier, we spoke about the ways to listen to deeply, and that obviously means no distractions. Like Oscar was saying, turn off your phone, no multitasking, and no Facebook. But as I'd said, this concept of listening intently to yourself and another person does have a much deeper root in the culture of our first Australians.